right, so fast forward 85 years or whatever to digital hotspots, which some people think is the end of ham radio as a hobby, and other people do not feel that. For me personally, I mean, I was raised in the digital age, starting in the 80s, and interestingly, one of the reasons I did not get my ham radio license until like 4 years ago, whatever it was because of the CW requirement, which I could never pass. But anyway, be that as it may, digital radio is the thing, right? And I think my personal opinion is, it's a great complement to the rest of the hobby, and it's really important, I think, in bringing new people into the hobby. Because, as you know, it's an electronic age now. We're all based on the internet and all that. So I think, it's great. And it's also very, very difficult for some people to get into this, especially some of us older folks that aren't, living and breathing on the internet every day. So this is my attempt to kind of make it a little bit easier for you guys, to just kind of give you a brief intro. Obviously, we don't have 2 hours, 2 hours or 3 hours to go through this, so it'll be fairly quick. But I want to just give you a brief taste for it and kind of give you some of my experiences with it. So that's the point here. All right, so a quick intro. First of all, hotspots, basically, and it's kind of a misnomer in terms of the way they name them, because most people, when you say hotspot, they think, oh, that's Wi-Fi. Well, actually, a ham radio hotspot talks to another hotspot, typically, which is a Wi-Fi hotspot. And so what it is, it's more like a bridge, right? So it's a bridge between like an HT or a digitally capable ham radio, typically VHF, UHF, and the internet, right? So that's kind of a misnomer, but anyway, that's what they're called. You can also, of course, do the same thing with a repeater. And interestingly, a lot of repeaters on the back end have a hotspot which connects them to the internet. So it's really the same technology, but the cool thing about having your own hotspot is, first of all, you don't tie up a repeater, and secondly, you can do anything you want to it, right? It's yours. So it just gives you a lot more freedom to play around. You don't have to worry about tying up somebody's repeater for hours. So this is just a quick, simple diagram there, right? So we've got, up here, a variety of radios talking through a hotspot. So again, this is digital, typically VHF, UHF to the hotspot. The hotspot, this isn't really shown here really, but that also then connects to a Wi-Fi hotspot, which gets it onto the internet. And then it then connects out to either another repeater or another server. These are typically called reflectors. Okay, and reflector is actually an older term. It dates back to the beginning of email, where if somebody wanted to send a broadcast email to a bunch of email addresses, you would send it to a reflector. That's what we do with the club. We have a reflector. So it's the same idea, except for it's doing it for voice and for digital communications. All right, so these radios typically communicate via simplex, to the hotspot. So it's fairly straightforward from that perspective. And I think I touched on all of that. Oh yeah, and then you can also get dongles, like a USB dongle you can plug into your PC, and that eliminates the need for a radio altogether. You just need a headset, like a USB headset with a microphone and whatnot on it. Some people really say that's really not radio, because you're not doing radio anywhere except for possibly on the back end. But in any event, not going to get into that religious discussion. Yeah, so what's a hotspot? Why should I care? As I mentioned, it lets you talk without a repeater. Nice thing about hotspots is they support multiple protocols. Now, I'll get into protocols in a minute, but regardless of whether you have a Yaesu digital radio or an ICOM or a Kenwood or whatnot, most hotspots will accommodate all of those various protocols. Not at the same time, typically. I'll get into that too. They can also bridge across protocols. So say you've got a Yaesu radio, which uses Yaesu's proprietary, it's called System Fusion, and you want to talk to digital mobile radio or DMR. Hotspot can actually bridge from one protocol to another, which opens up a whole another world of things that you can do with those. And really, all you need is a hotspot, and we've got a couple examples. John brought one, and Corey brought one. And I'll have them pass those around so you can check them out. And I'm going to get into the different types of hotspots in a minute and the pros and cons. John's got the Cadillac. That's the OpenSpot 4. which is self-contained. It's got a battery in there. You literally just turn it on. It's not exactly plug and play, but it's a lot more plug and play than the other ones like Corey's. Corey has what's called a Pi Star hotspot, and it's based on a Raspberry Pi. So I'll get into those in just a minute. Okay, so you can buy them off the shelf like John's. You can just go to Shark RF and you can buy an Open Spot 4 for what, $300, somewhere around there. Or you can get a DIY Pi Star, which I'll get into in a minute, which you can put together yourself. And then there's some that are sort of in between where you're actually buying a Pi Star hotspot, but somebody puts it together for you. So I'll get more into that in a minute here. All right, so let's talk about protocols. This is actually me here before when my first digital radio was, so I made two mistakes. one is I bought a Baofeng, and the second was I tried to do DMR. And those are just very difficult, especially when you put them together. You know, Baofengs aren't the greatest radios to start with. You know, they're very inexpensive, but the programming software is just absolutely horrendous. So that was mistake one. And then the DMR is probably pretty close to being tied with ICOM's D-Star as being the most difficult way to get on digital radio. I'll talk more about that a little bit. So here are the four. There's actually more than three, but there's actually about 20 different digital protocols out there, which isn't too surprising knowing hams, right? Everybody's coming up with a new protocol for something all the time, right? But the three major ones were primarily the Yaesu system, which is Yaesu System Fusion, otherwise known as YSF. Sometimes you'll hear it called Wires X, and sometimes you'll hear it called C4FM. Those are all variations on a theme. They are not the same thing, but they're part of the same protocol. So, and I could spend, you know, a couple hours just talking about that whole situation. ICOM has a proprietary system called D-Star, and it's very good. It's more difficult than Yaesu. The nice thing about Yaesu is that if you buy a Yaesu radio, and if you have a YSF repeater in your area, you can literally dial in the frequency, hit a button, or punch in the channel you want to talk to, the talk group, if you will, and you're on the air. It's very straightforward. It's a little more complex on a hotspot, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But as far as ease of use and just getting on the air using digital radio, that's the way. That's the fastest. Now, ICOM has their own proprietary system, which Kenwood also uses. It's called D-Star. And it works great. It's very good quality. But again, much more difficult to set up. And the most difficult, in my opinion, is digital mobile radio. And the reason for that is that DMR actually started out in public safety, right? So a lot of your law enforcement, fire departments, and so on, all of those systems are all based on DMR, which is great. And they're very resilient and they work great, but they were not designed for ham radio. And therein lies the problem. So what happened was a bunch of hams got together and they said, well, let's adapt it for ham radio. And it works, but it is not easy. I'll talk more about that too. And then there's many others, which have all been adapted primarily. So P25 is another one that was largely used by public safety. MXD and All-Star. All-Star is an interesting one. All-Star actually, as far as my understanding is, it actually started as a voice over IP like telephony protocol. Right, it was used so that telephone switches could talk to telephone switches using IP, internet. And then they adapted it, and now it's very heavily used in to backhaul digital traffic between ham radio repeaters and other repeaters. So like SkyHub is a perfect example where they have a very robust All-Star network behind all of that network, and that's what carries all the traffic between all the repeaters. And you can also excuse me, you can also use All-Star yourself. You can install All-Star on a PC or a Mac and with a headset, and you can actually communicate that way as well. So it's kind of fun, but anyway. M17 is a brand new one that's just an open source, designed just for ham radio, and I haven't used it. I don't know much about it, but that's kind of the way things are going. I like the fact that it's open source, which none of these others are open source. They're sort of either proprietary, created by the vendors, or they were, it was adapted like DMR was. Okay, as far as digital radio, so DMR part of the difficulty of DMR, as I indicated earlier, is the fact that the radio choice that I made was poor. So you got kind of the two sides of any communications, right? You've got your piece, and then you got the destination piece. And if your piece is really difficult to program, then you're never going to get to the destination. And again, that was my first mistake, was going with Baofeng. Now, a lot of the handset manufacturers have started to make DMR a lot easier. And a good example of that is Anytone, which has some very nice radios. And they're kind of mid-priced. They're not as high as a Yaesu or an Icom. They're not as cheap as a Baofeng. But what's really cool is we've got vendors like Bridgecom, which have put together classes, and they'll even get on the phone with you and help you get set up. And that, in my opinion, is worth 3 times what the value of the handset is, because they can get you on the air very quickly. Other vendors have come up with ways to, I forget who's doing this, but it's an Android phone that's also a DMR radio, right? And it downloads the entire repeater list and can actually roam between repeaters and all kinds of neat stuff, right? So there's been a lot of work done on DMR to make it easier to use. So that's why I think it's now probably number 2, and D-Star is probably number 3 in terms of difficulty. The other nice thing about DMR is, since it's sort of, it's used all over the place, is you have a wide variety of handsets. Not only do you have the ham radio manufacturers, like Anytone doing it, Radioddity, I have a couple of the Radioddity GD77s. And what's cool about those, first of all, they are cheap. They're like $60 or something. But more importantly, Radioddity opened up their firmware and allowed hams to rewrite it. So they open sourced the firmware. So you can download, it's called OpenGD77 firmware, and then you just basically, you upload it to the radio, and it's designed for hams. So it makes it so much easier, because you can do things like switching channels and all that sort of thing without having, a PhD in radio science or digital sciences. So that's recommended too. And there's a new one called the GD88, which I haven't played with yet. And then you've got commercial radio. So you can go to these swap meets, and you'll see people selling old Motorola radios that probably came out of a police car or a fire engine at some point for nothing, like 20 bucks. The only catch is, if you buy one of those, is you have to be able to program it. And the programming software can cost, 20 times what the radio costs. Or you have to find somebody that has the software that can program it for you. But those are incredibly great radios. Those radios were multiple thousands of dollars when they were new. And they're still really good. And they're DMR, commercial quality DMR radios. And there's a whole bunch of others too that I don't really have a lot of experience. And then in red, of course, stay away from Baofeng, just kind of in general. Baofeng does make some decent analog radios, but their DMR radios, not so good. Now, we'll see during TechFest if Baofeng's cleaned up their act with their signal issues or not. All right, D-Star. So I'm a big Icom fan. I've got a 7300 at home. I've got a 7000 at home. I also have a 705. And Icom makes incredible radios. Except for digital. D-Star is just not easy. A lot of these protocols, the way you have to get on the air with them is, you go into the radio and you have to set up, your destination, be it a repeater or a hotspot. You put your call sign in, and then you have to figure out the code for the reflector you want to talk to. And you have to put all that into your radio, right? And then you have to cross your fingers and key up, and hopefully that makes the connection through. So that's sort of the way that D-Star works. DMR is similar, only even more complicated, because you've got like color codes and all kinds of other stuff, which I don't have time to get into. But in any event, yeah, I would pick D-Star as my last choice in terms of trying to get digital working. I have my 705 at home set up through a hotspot, and I had it connected to SkyHub, and just for some reason it just stopped working. And nobody seems to know why. I still haven't figured it out, so it's just kind of flaky. And then again, YSF is great. Yaesu did a really nice job in making it simple. As I mentioned, you point it at your hotspot or at a repeater. You can press a button on the radio, and it will actually pull up a list of all the talk groups available, or reflectors, if you will. And you can literally menu through, and you hit connect, and you're connected. It doesn't get much simpler than that when it comes to digital radio. I will say though that it depends on the model of the radio you buy. Like I started, my first Yaesu was an FT70DR, which is a great little radio. That thing is bulletproof, it is waterproof, it's probably bomb-proof, but it is nearly impossible to program that thing, because especially if you're trying to do it through the keypad. Right now you can buy the RT System software for it, which is what saved my life in terms of getting that thing programmed. Fortunately, Yaesu over time has gradually improved their user interface. It's still not as good as ICOM in my opinion, but it's gotten a lot better. So, you know, you can do like the FT1 through 5 DR series. I have an FT5 DR and it's a wonderful radio. Just as reliable as the 70D, but you've got a touch screen on it. And, oh, it's just so much easier to program. And anything from like the 3 on up are all pretty easy to program. I didn't mention the 991A, but that's another good one. That's, of course, that's their top of the line, well, maybe not top of the line, but one of their high-end base radios. And then on the mobile side, the 100 to 500 DRs are all pretty good too. Although again, the lower ones, like the 100, I have two, or now I have one of the FTM 100 DRs. Again, great radio, really hard to program without the RT System software. But once you get up to like the the 400 and 500s, they've gotten a lot easier. Again, they're putting touch screens into them, and it's just getting a lot easier. All right. Choosing a hotspot. This is not my shack, but my shack isn't too different from this. I have 4 hotspots, I think, in my shack. I meant to bring some with me, and I forgot. But in any event, so the easiest, as you might guess, buy an off-the-shelf hotspot. You know, go down to HRO or DX Engineering or wherever, and get it, or get an open spot for one of those commercial radios or hotspots that is supported by somebody. And those are, especially open spot, are great quality. They can run autonomously because they've got a battery in there, so you can actually hook them up to your phone hotspot and use them in the car, all kinds of stuff very easily. And they're easy to manage because it's all done through a web-based interface. But you're going to pay for it. Those open spots run, $300. You might be able to get an older one for a little bit less, but you're still looking at a couple $100 for one of those. Zoom Spot is kind of in the mid-price range, and they're good, but they're based on Pi-Star underneath. So, in my opinion, if you have enough skills, why not just build your own, because you're going to save yourself $150 by doing that. And then you've got those jumbo spot and so on. The way I went, A, because I'm kind of a Linux guy anyway, and B, because I like to do kits and stuff. So I went the DIY route. And what you can do, you buy yourself a Raspberry Pi. Everybody know what that is? Microcontroller, or single board computer, sometimes people call them. You can, $16 these days. Yes, they come back on the market at, they're still limited stock. But yeah, like Adafruit has got the Pi Zero W for $16. Oh, really? Yeah. In and out of stock, though.
Pi 5 is coming out October 23rd.
Yeah. The Raspberry Pi 5 is coming out, and I'm already on the wait list for that one. Anyway, but the point is, yeah. So for $15, $50, I mean, you can spend up to a couple $100 on a Raspberry Pi if you want to, but you really just need a base. They call it the Pi Zero. And the Pi Zero W has Wi-Fi in it. That's what you want. But again, you can get those as cheap as $15, $20. For a while, Micro Center had those for $5. This was before COVID, though. So, anyways, so you pick yourself up a Raspberry Pi, and then you buy what's called an MMDVM, and don't ask me what that stands for. But anyway, that's the hat, the thing that plugs into the Pi that gives you the bridge between the radio, the ham radio, and the Raspberry Pi. And those you can get on Amazon, on eBay, from Alibaba for cheap.
Is that an RF deck or what?
Yeah, it's got a little RF. They typically are UHF, and it's just got a little radio in there, just a single chip kind of radio. Yeah.
The DV Mega board.
Yeah, the DV Mega is another one. Yeah, that's similar, same idea. Yeah, there's several different types of those hats.
So it's a little ham transceiver in that.
Yeah, it's like a 100 milliwatt transceiver.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, which is amazing. I hooked that up to my J-pole, and I was getting about 20 miles away. I was hearing myself over with 100 milliwatts. So on the other hand, yeah, Corey.
Just
not a ham and you're interested in that, does that require a license then to operate that? Because
Good question. Yeah, question was, if you're not a ham and you want to get one of those, does it require a license? Well, technically, not to like plug it in, you know, but yeah, you do need a license to, because it operates on ham radio frequencies. So yeah, very good question. And I'll get into those frequencies in a little bit too, because there are some recommendations and so on. All right, let's see. So back to the Pi Star side of it. So you've got a Raspberry Pi. You get yourself a hat, MMDVM, or you know, one of those other hats. Those can be had for $20 to $50. Some of them come with a case. Some of them don't. Some of them are great quality. Some of them are, you know, but for $20, you know, sometimes it's worth the gamble. You need a micro SD card to stick into the Pi. That's about $10, and the software's free. So you get the Pi. You have to install Pi Star on it, which you can download for free, and you have to have enough knowledge to know how to burn an image onto an SD card. But there's software now that will do that that's very inexpensive. So, or I should say it's free, and it's actually easy to use. Right? So you literally just plug the card in your computer, you download a file off the internet, there's a free utility that you start up, and you just say, yeah, put it on this card, and you hit, you know, write, and it writes it, and then you stick the card into the Pi and you turn it on. So it's gotten a lot simpler than it used to be. Pi Star is nice too because it boots right up into a graphical interface. It's a web-based interface. So the only thing you need to do that's a little bit tricky is before you boot it, you go out to their website and you put in your Wi-Fi network name and the password, and it creates a little file that you have to drop on the card before you move it over to the Raspberry Pi. Excuse me. And then when the Pi boots, it automatically finds your network, and then you can connect to it with a web browser. Okay. Excuse me. Let's talk simplex and duplex. Yes, sir.
Sorry. So you're putting Linux onto the Pi, and then do you have an interface or an application for the hat on through it?
Oh, good question. So, yeah, the question was around the order of getting the hotspot going. Actually, when you download the Pi Star image from the website, it has Linux on it, right? It's a bootable ISO. So literally all you're doing is you're just writing that image onto the card, then you drop that little file that's got your Wi-Fi information, and the whole thing boots. Yeah, so that's a great question. Because it used to be, you know, a lot of times you'd have to get Linux running first, and you'd have to install the app on top of it, and that's not required with Pi Star.
So how does the hat interface to the Pi? Does it use USB or?
Good question. The question was, how does the hat interface to the Pi? It's a hardware. You just literally, it plugs into the pins, the I/O pins on the Pi.
It's the I/O that's built on the Pi.
Yep.
It's not. Okay.
Yeah, it just uses a few of the pins. Yeah, so literally, you know, the only thing you have to do sometimes if you're buying these kits is sometimes the headers aren't soldered into the board, so you have to do some basic soldering to just put the pins in, you know, which I hope that any ham with at least a license can do that, at least that much, but yeah, it's not hard. Okay, simplex and duplex. All of my hotspots are simplex, and all that means is that you can do one thing at a time with them. So I can talk on one DMR talk group or one YSF group at a time. Duplex, as the name implies, just means it has basically two radios in there, right? So you can have two DMR channels going, or one DMR and one YSF, something like that, right? So that's the only difference. Where it comes in really handy is one limitation of DMR. If you want to change from one DMR talk group to another one, you have to be able to send a code to your hotspot to say change channels. And if that hotspot is busy, like if you connect to one of the busier talk groups, nobody ever unkeys for more than about a second, right? And so you have like 1 second to get in there and change your channel. Now there's another way of doing that, but with a duplex hotspot, you can have that second one open, so you can just switch over to that and say switch the channel, right? Now you can go into the user interface for the hotspot, and you can change the channel that way. But if you're on a repeater, good luck, because you gotta wait, you know. Anyway, so that's the only difference between single and double and duplex, simplex and duplex. As far as frequency, so up until a couple of years ago, it was sort of a wild, wild west. There were no guidelines as far as what frequencies to use. In fact, I brought one up. Excuse me. I brought up a YSF, what they call it. But basically, I took one of my FTM 100 50-watt radios, and then you buy this little box that interfaces to the internet, and you can turn it into basically a repeater for $100 or whatever it is. But then I got thinking, well, what frequency do I use? And there was no answer. And nobody said, oh yeah, no, you have to do it between here and here or whatever. So, I just sort of looked on the Colorado band plan, and I found that for the experimental frequencies, and I just picked one. And I was running 50 watts, and it was great. It went forever, but I'm thinking, well, that's probably not so good. Anyway, so a couple of years ago, the CCR came up with some guidelines for hotspots. And so basically they came up with 10 different channels, 1 through 10. And these are just guidelines. These are not requirements. So you can still actually do kind of whatever you want technically. And then here are the frequencies, and they're all UHF. And so that's what I do. I just use a couple of those frequencies. And again, most of these hotspots are only putting out 100 milliwatts, so who cares? You're not really, unless your next door neighbor's a ham and has hotspots, then you might want to coordinate with them. But otherwise, and as I mentioned, I'm just incredibly amazed at how far those hotspots can go. If you have a good antenna, yeah, 15, 20 miles I've been able to hear my repeater on. That's with my, in my car with a good antenna. Yeah, and a J-pole on top. All right, real quick, just an overview of the Raspberry Pi. I kind of already covered this, but cool thing about the Pis is they were designed to be a very inexpensive single board computer that anybody could buy. The first Raspberry Pi I think was $35. And it has everything in there. It has USB ports, it has video output, everything you need. All you do is you plug in a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, right? And you put Linux on it and off you go. So, and that came out, I don't know, it's probably been 10 years now when the first one came out, somewhere around there. And they're inexpensive, and up until COVID, you can find them everywhere. And then with supply chain issues and stuff, things just came unglued. At one point, they were shipping 500,000 Raspberry Pis a month, and they still couldn't catch up with the backlog. So they're incredibly popular as well, as you might guess. And so the Raspberry Pi Foundation is a nonprofit. They're based in the UK, and they continue investing in this. Now there's a couple of magazines and all kinds of great stuff. It's an incredible support network around it. So if you want just a cheap computer and you want to learn Linux, Unix, that's a great way to go because there's so much available for it and it's not expensive. The operating system on Raspberry Pis is called Raspbian, which is a derivative of Linux. And it's also gotten a lot easier to use. Interestingly, you can also run other stuff on the Raspberry Pi. There's even a flavor of Windows. I don't know why you would want to do it, but anyway, you could run Windows on it if you wanted. All right, I was going to try to do a live demo, but then with all the difficulties of connecting over a guest Wi-Fi and stuff, I just decided that probably wasn't worth it. But basically, so this is what this is actually a Pi-Star hotspot here. I have two of them just like this. This is a little bit higher end one. There's a Raspberry Pi 3 running underneath here, and that's what the hat looks like. Basically, it's just a little single board. You can see where it plugs into the pins. And then it's got a little OLED display on there that shows what's going on with the hotspot. In this case, it's showing that it's using DMR. And it'll show you who's transmitting, their call sign, all kinds of neat stuff. So, they're really neat. And this is what the user interface looks like. So basically, and this was just taken right off of my, this is my Yaesu hotspot. So I have 3 hotspots running. I got one for Yaesu, one for DMR, and one for ICOM. And because they're cheap, why not? So as you can see here, these are all the modes that are supported. Now, one thing to realize about a hotspot, and this took me a while to realize this, is that, especially with Pi-Star now, the open spots may be different. But with Pi-Star, even if you have a duplex hotspot, you're probably not going to be very successful in running 2 different protocols at the same time, like YSF and DMR. right? They just kind of get confused. They may have fixed this problem since back in the day, but so that's why I have 3 of them, one for each major system. So that's what this is showing, So this is showing that it's connected up to YSF. There's DMR, D-Star, and a whole bunch of others are all on there. Then this shows the status of the network, so it's connected to the YSF network. Here's my transmit and receive frequencies. So yeah, if you have a Yaesu radio and you drive by my house, you can connect to my hotspot. No, actually you can't because I've got it set up as a private. But you can set these up as public hotspots. Anybody can use it. I'm sure they want to do that. Anyway, and then down here at the bottom it shows the network that it's connected to. So this particular one is connected to the SkyHub link. And then up top here, this is the activity. So anytime anybody keys up and talks, their call sign shows up here, which is great, because I mean, how many times when you get on a QSO with somebody and you don't catch their call sign, or you get it wrong or something. So, when you're doing digital, you just keep your hotspot dashboard up and you can just see who they are. Even more, excuse me, you can click on their call sign and it'll take you to their QRZ page. So pretty cool. So anyway, shows that. A couple things that are really useful to know on the right side here. This is the duration of the transmission. This one right here, loss and the error rate are really important. So if you've got a bit of a sketchy internet connection or your hotspot's a long ways from your Wi-Fi hotspot, you may see these numbers creeping up. Now this obviously sits right next to my Wi-Fi, so, and I have pretty fast internet, so I don't have any loss. But yeah, if you see these going up, there's probably a problem with your internet connection, or could also be the distance of you from your radio that you're talking on and the hotspot. And that's about it. Oh yeah, and then there's other things up here, like you can click on admin, under admin, and again, this is all web-based, it's just a web browser. So you can upgrade the software with a click, you can make configuration changes through clicks. You literally, I'm almost never drop into Linux on a Pi-Star, and the only time I do is because I'm messing around, right? So most people that use a hotspot never have to even worry about what's running underneath. And then the configuration is there. I don't think I have a config screen in any event. Let me talk about a couple other things that you might find useful. There is an incredible group based here in the Denver area called the Colorado Digital Multi-Protocol Group. That's their website, coloradodigital.net. And they have a dedicated set of talk groups and channels. Like if you have a question, this kind of presupposes that you're already on digital radio to use it. But if you have a question or a problem, you can use their talk groups, and there's usually somebody hanging out on those. Even the guys that wrote Pi-Star tend to hang out on these channels. I mean, it's incredible the people that you can reach out to. There's also a really good digital learning net every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. It's on SkyHub, on any of the SkyHub repeaters, or it's also on, they used to also bridge in this talk group. I'm not sure if they still do or not, but anyway. But yeah, join that, and there's, again, sometimes they'll have some of the guys that wrote Pi-Star or some of the other really, really knowledgeable folks. One of the guys in Australia that wrote part of that open GD77 firmware, he hangs out on that. So you're talking top-notch knowledge there. So that's a great place to go. You can also join our TechNet net every Tuesday, and we have some folks on there too. If you have problems, you can ask questions. Also, after the digital learning net on these talk groups, they have an HD happy hour. So if you want to keep going, they can keep going too. The Pi-Star website is here, so it's pi-star.uk, and there's a bunch of forums there. There's a bunch of primers if you want to learn how to get it installed. You can download the ISO to burn on your hotspot and so on. As far as Raspberry Pis, there's the website right there, and then there's a bunch of retailers here. SparkFun is in Boulder, by the way, so they're a nice one, like a local company to buy from. I really like Adafruit. Adafruit is owned by a woman. They're in New York City, and she started it about 5 years ago, and it's just done incredibly well. And their website's super cool. They got lots of videos and all kinds of neat stuff on there. Lots of projects and all that sort of thing. Micro Center does Sometimes stock Raspberry Pis are kind of iffy depending on availability, but obviously they're here in Denver too, just off of 225 there and I-25. And then there's no PiShop.us. Now this last one is an incredible website. It's called Amateur Radio Notes by Tosh, and he's local too. Okay, he's your FHS. And he has documented his entire digital radio journey from A to Z. And he covers all the different protocols, all kinds of tips and techniques that he's learned over the years. I mean, this is worth his weight in gold on that website. And he also hangs out on that net, by the way. So I think that's pretty much it. That's my AI-generated portrait there. It's a little frightening. Anyway, any questions?
You said that these things could translate between the different codes. Is that done in, for instance, the Pi-Star Union, or is it done somewhere?
Good question. The question was, so I mentioned that you can translate between one protocol and another, and the question was, is that done in the hotspot, or is it done elsewhere? Yeah, it's done by the hotspot. In fact, if I go back to this screen here, you see these cross modes are listed. Here's the YSF cross mode and the DMR cross mode. Now, one thing I do know that is an advantage of the OpenSpot is that it does a lot of those translations in hardware as opposed to software. And they also, I think they license some of those. It's called a codec. A codec translates between one digital voice standard and another. And I believe they license those. That's part of the reason why it costs more. And so they do a lot of that stuff more natively than the Pi-Star does, because the Pi-Star is free open source. So definitely one advantage of the OpenSpot. But yeah, it's all done in the case of the Pi-Star, it's done in software, and in the case of the other ones, it's done in hardware. But it's all done at the hotspot. Other question?
If you connect your hotspot, go mobile with it, and connect it with a jetpack or something like that, that opens up a whole nother world. Anywhere you can get a satellite signal, you can talk anywhere in the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. You can take through a jetpack, or even you can hotspot your phone and connect your radio hotspot to your phone's hotspot, and you can go mobile with it. The only problem I found, naturally, that the cellular signal is always going up and down and up and down. So, like I had my Pi-Star, and we were going to Missouri. My daughter went to school in Missouri, and so I had it all set up to talk through my hotspot. We were going down I-70 in eastern Colorado, and it was just worthless. But if you have one that uses satellite, that's a whole different deal, right? But yeah, but you can absolutely do that, and it does work well as long as you have a strong cellular signal.
So what's a jetpack?
Oh, jetpacks, that was Verizon's standalone hotspot that uses the LTE network on the backside. Yeah, but nowadays you can just hotspot your phone too, if you have that as part of your plan. Yes, Jim.
For example, the YSF cross mode, you would have a YSF handheld, and then you could connect this thing up to, say, the Brandmeister network,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
DMR.
Yeah, so the question was, so like with this one, with like, you can see the YSF X mode, cross mode, it would allow you to use your YSF, your Yaesu radio, to talk to like a DMR network, like Brandmeister is one of the DMR networks. And so yeah, it does that translation and lets you skip across, and vice versa. So yeah, it's kind of cool. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I would presume that all of the slides that you put up today will be available on the club's website.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to put the slides up as well as the recording up on the, or Jed will do it actually.
It's a good way to get started with the Raspberry Pi.
Good way to get started?
Yeah, starting from ground zero. I mean,
Well-
QSD advertising these kits and whatever.
Yeah, a good way to get started is I would just buy a starter kit, like Adafruit sells them, and so does Micro Center, and that's got everything you need in it. It's got the case, the power supply. A lot of them will come with a pre-burned SD card even, you know, so they're really simple to get started. And then literally you just plug in a monitor and the keyboard and a mouse into it and boot it up, and it boots up just like any other computer. And then a lot of them will also come with a book, which is like an actual analog book. Well, they used to. Maybe they're all digital now. But anyway, but yeah, there's a lot of great primers. There's like Raspberry Pi for Dummies, and and it will lead you through it. But what you'll find is that from the graphical side of the Raspberry Pi, it's not too different from Mac or Windows. It's point and click and all that. Where it starts to get really sketchy, is that Linux is not as user friendly. It's not really designed to insulate you from from everything. So you wind up dropping down to a command line, just like the old DOS prompts, to do certain things, right? But that's where those books come in handy, because they give you, a reference on the different commands, and they kind of give you a little overview on how they work. So that's a good way to do it. Another really neat Raspberry Pi is the Pi 400, which Corey has, because Corey and I traded. I traded him a Pi 400, he gave me a laptop in exchange. But the Pi 400 is cool because it has a keyboard in it too. So it has a Raspberry Pi 4 in it and a keyboard. So literally all you need is a mouse and a monitor. And it's all one unit. So yeah. All right. And that one's, I think, like $100 or $150 now, somewhere in there. But yeah, you can get a lower end Raspberry Pi for not a lot of money. Any others? All right, so I beat everybody in submission.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'll reach out too. I have been through every one of these protocols, and I've been through DMR and all that stuff. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to help you guys along too, or jump on the Tuesday night net if I'm
Careful what you offer.
I know, yeah. What did I just say? All right, thanks guys. Appreciate it.